Welcome to the Worldbuilders Anvil, episode 113. Today's topic, fear could kill your world. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the Worldbuilders Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build. Welcome back. As always, I'm Jeffrey W. Ingram, and you are?
Michael Miller.
Michael Miller. Very interesting.
You know, I don't like it when you do it that way. So why you do that?
Just because you were screwing with me earlier.
All right, fair enough.
Okay. All right. So now, first we have to find a more clickbaity sort of title. That didn't say extreme enough.
Title? Yeah.
Not extreme enough.
Fear kills the world?
Yeah, we'll just cut out some of the other things. It'll make it much...
World destroyer.
Nice.
That's a good one. All
right. Now, some of you are wondering why we're talking about fear this week, and fear is a topic we talk a little bit about here and there. And this week, the reason we're talking about fear is we want to kind of cover not only some of the traditional sort of fear things that hold world builders back from sharing, but also a quick way that you can actually deal with it.
And to be clear, we're not talking about the fear that exists within the world you're creating. We're talking about your fear.
Yes. This is about you this week. And it is about your fear and how your fear stops you from doing what you want to. Maybe you don't want to be an author. Maybe you want to be a groundhog, or maybe you want to be something.
Groundhog again. Okay.
Or maybe you want to be an astronaut, but you're working at a job that you'd like, but maybe don't love, or maybe you don't even like your job. You're just doing it for money.
Yeah, maybe you're like, this is where you ended up, and this is what pays your bills, so you're afraid to take that leap.
So we'll give you 3 steps that if you go through will help you really think about the fear, because there is some risk in fear. That's something people don't realize. Fear is a tool built by nature in your body to warn you of impending troubles. The problem is, as humans, we are taught, at an evolutionary level, at a biological level, to run from fear. And so fear will come up into your brain and it will make you stop whatever you're doing. Sometimes it's rational. For instance, if you're afraid to go into a burning house, you can actually work through why there's actual reasons to be afraid to do that.
Yeah, not good to go into a burning house.
Yes. And you might need to overcome that. Let's say, your family's in there or something. But most fears aren't things that really hurt you. They're things that hold you back. They are the little voices that are in your head that tell you, oh, you can't do that. Oh, that book sucks. Blah, blah, blah.
And if you haven't, I'll get more into this at some point later in the conversation, I'm sure. But if we don't touch on it, I just want to mention, try to fill your world with why not people.
Yes.
You don't want the people that are saying why or don't do that. You want people that say, yeah, try it. Why not try it? Do it.
That's right.
People that empower you.
Very good. So we're going to go over this episode of, beyond that, a few of the real common ones that come through. We're going to make Mike share his deepest, darkest fears so I can use it against him at some point.
I think we already covered it, actually.
I don't remember. I don't really listen to you, which really kind of makes it
How are you going to use my deepest fear against me if you don't listen?
We'll skip that one.
Yeah, you're going to have to pay attention, or at least have somebody else. But where's the producer? The producer should take notes.
She will come in and destroy the room later.
I'm sure she will.
All right. So, but remember the big thing this episode, we'll give you 3 steps that you can take that will actually allow you to look at your fears and do a little risk management on it and say, hey, is this a worthwhile fear or not?
Where do you want to start?
All right. Well, let's start at the top. So I'll probably have to read them all since I wrote them.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think I can read some. Let me try reading the first one.
All right.
It can kill your world before it starts.
My goodness.
I added letters that you actually don't have there.
Oh, they're all there basically for the most part.
They're, ethereally represented.
They are necronomically spoken in there.
So fear can kill your world before it starts if, for sake of argument, you have ideas for a story or a full-blown world, a novel, whatever, and for whatever reason, like I could list a ton of reasons, but for whatever reason, you're afraid to even start it like right off the bat. Maybe you're afraid. I'm just going to mention all your interview episodes. Jeff's, if you go back and listen to any of the interview episodes that Jeff has, I've listened to almost all of them. And in almost every one of them, one of the things that each one of these accomplished writers, most of them novelists, said was that one of the things that stopped them from, like, one of the things that took them a long time to get started because they were afraid no one was going to like it. They were afraid that there wouldn't be an audience, that people wouldn't enjoy what they had written, or they were afraid it wouldn't be upheld as well as other fictional creators had. Like, oh, well, I can't make a great horror novel. Like, I've really got this great idea for a horror novel, but man, Stephen King's writing is really good. It's better than mine.
Yes. So. And I think another really common one too is I wouldn't even know where to start. And that's just with the internet today. That should be an excuse for nothing. You can research, you can come, and obviously you people listen to my podcast. So for the world building part of it, it'll help you get started.
Come here.
For that part, definitely come to the podcast. But there are podcasts about writing. There are blogs about writing, about fantasy writing.
NaNoWriMo.
NaNoWriMo will help get you going if you want to do it, if you don't let your fears hold you back. So I'll do the next one here.
I bet you can't read your own writing.
Okay. It never leaves your mind. See, all the letters are there. And this is what I like to call the never-ending story quandary. It is the fact the void is destroying everything because you create the story or the world or parts of it in your brain, and you might not even share it with one other person. It might just stay trapped in there, and it could be something really cool. And if you go look to the fantasy selection of actual real, like, fantasy, and you ignore all the science fiction stuff, it's kind of hard to find good fantasy out there. There's definitely some of it, don't get me wrong. But most fantasy made isn't really great. Book-wise, yes. Movie-wise, video-wise, no. And if we can get more better fantasy out there and you do all the work, Mike and I can benefit.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So we'd appreciate it.
I mean, the bottom line is the more quantity, the more quality.
Yes. Well, in general. And maybe at some point we'll talk about steps that you can take to help ensure quality as well. But that's a different episode.
I think that we should totally do an episode on quality control, but I want to make a mention of it. Just create. Don't be afraid to create something that's poor.
Your first draft.
You have to create. You have to just do it.
Your first draft should be horrible. It should be incomplete.
You shouldn't shoot for horrible.
No,
but if it's horrible,
your first draft should be horrible. Not necessarily the
done.
Words.
Like, you got to finish it.
But the thing is, you have to get the story out there. You can fill in more plots. You can add more depth once it's done. The whole point of a first draft of a story is to get it out there. And your story might not be a written work. Maybe it's a game for your friends. Maybe you want to create stories and share it with your child before they go to bed. And you don't want to read books that you buy. You just want to share it with your kid. Hopefully, you're not being held back by fear from that. But people can become anxious, especially when they're creating something. And a child or a family member can be very powerful in your fear of their judgments, whether or not it's even realistic or would happen. Those are the rejections you fear the most. At least I personally do.
And don't think about what you're trying to create as like it has to be a finished product right off the rip. Because you ask any novelist, anyone who's gotten a piece of writing published, they have to go through it so many times. Like, they have to go through the story and revamp and revamp and revamp. So, like, you think about, like, don't think about it like writing a story. Think about, like, engineering something. Like, so when someone goes to build the first car, they didn't just make a Ferrari right off the bat. You know, they built a bunch of pieces of junk till they slowly ironed out all the kinks and made something that worked well. It's the same thing with a story. You know, you're gonna, crash down the hill until you have something done until you get to the bottom. And then you're going to go back to the top and start again and make it smoother and better every time. But don't be afraid to crash to the bottom of the hill.
Yes, because sometimes you're going to crash.
You're going to crash.
And we'll get to how to deal with crashing in a moment.
Yeah. Failure is success training.
Now, I want Michael to read the next one.
You are good enough, even if others are doing it better.
Okay.
And this kind of goes back to what I said a moment ago about like Stephen King writing. Like, I've got a great idea for a horror book, but it's not as good as what Stephen King writes. So I'm afraid people wouldn't read it because it's not as good as what somebody else does.
Yeah. Or
don't make those comparisons.
I've known Neil Gaiman. This is something that goes through my brain. Jeff's known Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman, I'm watching Lucifer right now, which makes it even worse.
I want to see that show. I heard it's good.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I don't want to be Neil Gaiman. I want to write stories I love. Maybe they won't ever technically be as good as his, but it's irrelevant. People want to be entertained. They want to enjoy stories. And there are not enough out there. And you look through the selection at Amazon, you're like, there are hundreds of books out there. Wow. And that's really underestimated on my part there. Woo.
Yeah.
But
yeah, there's only hundreds of books.
The simple fact is there are 7 billion people on this earth. Let's say only 1 billion of them might ever read a fantasy novel. There are not nearly enough books. And you have to keep in mind that if you use diligence to create your stories, to create your novels, if you do diligence, let's say you want to make video games or you want to do stories through video format on YouTube, you will find an audience. And there are ways to do that. But the thing is, you have to identify that it's the fear in your head telling you don't do that. And so let's go right in and say, what do you do? How do you deal with your fears? This is my summation of reading stuff. Big person that helped me get over my fear was John Acuff, where in his book, Start, and it's Punch Fear in the Face. And what a great title that is, because and it's not just in your creative endeavors you're going to run into fear. It's every part of your life. You get voices in your head. They go, stop. No, don't. And the problem is some of those are actually accurate. There is
sort out the ones that are.
There is some danger to flying an aircraft to fly an aircraft. However, if you do some research on it, you're going to learn that the likelihood you'll ever be killed in an aircraft flying, if you flew as much as you drove, you'd be much less likely to die flying. It's just a fact. So it's okay to be nervous about it. It's okay, but you have to go through it sometimes. What if on the other end of that is the love of your life? Are you going to stop because you're afraid of flying to see the most important person in your life? Of course not. But it can stop you. But the first thing you have to do is you have to write down all of the voices you hear in your head. Don't look for what your fears are. That is going to mislead you. You're going to tell yourself stuff that is, I'm afraid of a comet landing on me, because you're trying to think up. Don't try and focus on what you're actually afraid of. Listen to the voices in your head whenever you start something that make you want to stop and write them down.
Think of something you want to do.
Because that's the subconscious applying its pressure on you. That's the subconscious peer pressure. It's trying to stop you from going forward. It's not trying to be mean. It has no intention behind it. It's just there is a security risk sometimes in trying things in a different way or trying new things. The voices are completely harmless. And like I said, if you're walking down a dark alley in a very dangerous city, you might want to continue and go. I would. But that voice, when it says, stop, this is dangerous, you listen to it enough to look around and be extra cautious. Can I see down enough to be able to get down without being hurt? Because if it's a really dangerous part of town,
is there enough room that I could run away if I need to?
Exactly. What could a strategy be if something happens? Why I'm passing through this block? Because bad things do happen. So you can't ignore the voices. I'm not saying ignore the voices. That would be very bad. write all of the voices down. Once you have a list saying, these are the 15 voices I hear in my head when I try and create my story, the things that are stopping me from trying to share my story with my friends or through a novel or just on a website having fun, whatever they are, whatever those voices are, and you have them written down, then you know that these are the things you have to address. So you start going through them one by one. And you sit there and go, okay, if I have a fear in my head like no one's going to read this, ask yourself another question. Why not? Why are they not going to read this?
Why wouldn't they want to read it?
You are 100% correct. If you listen to that voice, no one will ever read it.
You're to quote Gretzky, you will miss 100% of the shots that you don't take.
And that's the perfect quote for this. If you fear taking that moment, if you fear taking that step, the voice is 100% right. But now the important thing, this is the risk management part of it. What is the worst thing that happens? If they read it, maybe it's not very good. Maybe you were right. Maybe you don't sell a lot of copies of the book. But you know what? One, you've become a better writer. One of my favorite guys out there is Jeff Goins. And in his writer's manifesto, he essentially says, the only thing that makes you a writer is writing. And you might even write it and get it all down there. And you start sharing with people and you realize it's not actually good enough. At that point, it's not necessarily a bad fear to say, well, 20 people that, I either know vaguely or I've checked this all out and they don't understand it. They don't get the point. Maybe at that point you can stop, but at least you've shared it. And you know what? You have become a better writer. I didn't do a lot of writing until a couple of years ago. And when I started writing, like the first chapters I wrote were horrific. And not in the sense of they're incomplete. And the thing was, the language was just horrible. And you go through it and you would read through it and you're like, I wrote this and I don't know what I was saying here. But now when I write a chapter out, the second book I wrote down the first draft of was a lot better read through the first time because I had done it once.
Yeah, get experience.
And maybe the first book you write is not the one you actually share out, or maybe it is if you work enough. You'd have to probably work more to get it there.
One of the things that, and this is just a word of encouragement, Jeff and I know a number of published authors. And one of them I had talked to, and she and I had done a lot of writing together. And she was a little apprehensive about her first story, her first novel. Mm-hmm. This was before it was even in the sold state.
Yeah.
And I was a very big advocate of that story. And I was like, you owe the world this story. Mm-hmm. Like, this is such a great story. You owe the world your effort to get it out there. So I really feel like there's only so many people in the world mm-hmm. that actually try to create.
Yes.
There's a lot of people that just work. They just do what they can do to get by, and they get by. And sometimes that's all they can do. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of people, and but I still think it's a minority mm-hmm. that were granted the talent to create.
Yeah.
And if you're one of them, everyone listening is.
Yeah.
Then you owe the world your creativity. Mm-hmm. You owe it to us. So do it.
And really, the worst possible thing is you get criticized. And if it's on the internet, it could actually be potentially quite rude.
Mm. Oh, yep. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't post it in 4chan or Reddit if you're afraid of that. But really, if you are so afraid of being criticized from people that don't even recognize you as a human, you're just some other letters on the internet to them. That they don't have any human values attached to you. If you're so afraid of that kind of criticism, and I'm going to say this with love, don't be afraid to ask for help. Because if that's the only thing that's stopping you, it could actually be that you need to work with a therapist. And that's not insulting and that's not degrading in any way. I'm not even saying you have to share. That's not what everyone even wants to do. But if that's the thing that you really want to do, if that is the one thing that would brighten your life, and the only thing holding you back is the fear of criticism from people you'll never meet. Or maybe some of them you will even meet, but they're just going to say they don't like it. It's not for them. But for that one person, there could be 10, there could be 20, there could be 30 people who love it. And they tell you that too. And you read 31 comments on your short story that you shared through your blog, and the only one you're going to remember is that guy's like, you suck. And that would probably be the level of the criticism as well. And sometimes the criticism you receive will benefit you. You know, most criticism I've received in my life with the friend group I have is very constructive. You know, most of us, well, unless we're joking.
Yeah, I was just saying, we can be tough.
We can be tough, but that's usually joking. If we're really critically working with each other, any of my friends can criticize me, but they do it in a way of like, this is what I either don't understand, or this is a way that you can make it better. And I use that to improve my storytelling. That's a useful tool. That should never be feared. But for those trolls, those really mean people, most of which you will never actually even see, hey, don't let that stop you. If your one goal is to succeed, is to get ahead, to publish a book or make those videos that you want to try and make money off of, or maybe you don't even want money for, maybe you just want to give it away. Don't let that criticism stop you. And if it's the only thing that's really stopping you, I would suggest don't be afraid to get help. And it might be from a pastor or a professional or just a friend who's really empathetic. But we got to work out those issues.
Let me throw out a reality that might sound like a cold splash of water, and part of it's meant to, but another part of it is meant to feel like a warm blanket. There's, getting back to the numbers, there's 7 billion people in the world. They're not all going to like you.
No.
And that's okay.
It's okay.
Because here's the thing. Millions of them are going to love you if you just show them what you're about. And if what you're about is your creative writing or some other creative endeavor, just get it out there.
If you get it out there and you take the steps to try and reach out to people,
people are going to love it.
Some people are going to love it.
Might not be a lot, but someone's gonna.
Yeah. You know,
don't worry about the people that don't. I mean, forget that.
Yeah, you have to let that go. Don't let that be the one thing that stops you. So remember, you know, the first thing is write down those lists of fears. That's the first thing that you do. The second thing is you ask yourself, why not? And then the third thing is, what is the worst that could happen if I go forward? And that's the one that will tell you, that's the one that will disable that voice. Because later on, you can go back to that list when you hear that voice again and go, oh, yeah.
Yeah, so what if I do? Well, what's the worst that could happen?
What's the worst that could happen?
And here's my thing. I come from a mentality of, and this, for me, it's usually when it comes to like social fears, is I'll pretty much say, I mean, you've known me long enough, I'll pretty much say exactly what's on my mind regardless of the circumstance.
Yes. He's not lying.
And that's because I accept the consequences. I say to myself, even in some pretty heightened circumstances, what's the worst that could happen?
Yeah.
And then I go, yeah, I accept that.
And if it's the right...
And sometimes that means, you know, there's been threats of physical violence in some of these scenarios I'm referring to.
And I'm sure, because sometimes people get upset. But the thing to remember is...
Some mean people do, too.
Yes, there's some mean people. And sometimes you don't even necessarily deserve the threats. And other times you might.
Yeah, there was a couple times.
I know you. But, you know, the biggest thing you have to remember is enjoy your life. You know, and if you have a goal, you know, I'm not saying stop your job tomorrow and just write that novel and publish it and you'll be a successful writer.
Yeah, we can't guarantee that.
There's a lot of work you have to do. A writer's part of being a writer. You know, there's a lot to that to actually sell your books to get enough money to quit work. But there are steps you can start taking. And once a month, we'll probably talk a little bit about different things that you can do.
The thing that I think is cool about writing is that while there are plenty of professional writers out there that they pay their bills on writing, is that you can do whatever you do for a living and be a writer. Yes. Like if you can't make enough money writing, you can still write. And
the thing is, even if it never goes out of your household, if you are a writer, it is because you write. And if you're not writing because you're afraid of sharing, once again, you're not a writer. Writers write. That's all they do. Becoming an author is the next step. But the thing is, take it one step at a time. Start doing research. There's so much great information out there. A lot of it you can get for free. And if you're smart enough, you could probably get all the information you need for free, apply it, and become successful enough to at least make some money to offset the cost of doing it. And you'll love it if that's what you do. If you want to run games, go to Roll20 if you can't get friends at your table anymore. You can go to these websites that have built-in like role-playing systems. You can play tabletop via essentially Skype, or I believe it's really Google Hangout, with people who want to play games. So whatever the storytelling is you want to do, you can find people as long as you at least have an internet connection, in which case it's kind of weird you're listening to my show. So I'm guessing if you're listening to the show, you have internet.
Do we get to say our show?
Yes.
No, I still think of it as your show.
Well, it isn't. It's the responsibility of it's mine, but it's really our show.
It's your show.
Yeah. Well, except for the bad parts.
You do more work on it than I do. What's that?
Except for the bad parts.
The bad parts are mine.
Yeah. Fair enough. Okay.
Moving on.
So then we can sell on.
So recap the 3 steps, please.
So the 3 steps are write down the list of your fears.
That's step 1.
That's step 1. Step 2, why not? See, Mike's confused by the words I wrote down there.
Yeah, because it's totally different than what you just said.
It's totally different than what
that's
I said,
fine.
but I realized that I like the why not there.
Okay.
And step 3.
Well, I think that you should say that on step 2.
But that's really part of step 1.
So what Jeff also has written there is, what are they telling you?
Yeah.
So like, what are your fears telling you? Basically, write down your fears and think about them.
Exactly. Go into more depth.
Yeah.
You are right. I should cover this too. So when you're going into more depth, because like I said, the voices are a subconscious attack on you, but you have to break down you have to be more specific than, oh my God, you're going to die if you do this.
No, you're not.
Okay, first, right off the bat, normally you're probably not going to have death at risk, especially if it's sharing.
Right.
Part of finding out what it's telling you is, what was I doing that it's trying to get me to stop? That's part of knowing that. You need to know essentially what the voices are telling you and what they're trying to stop you from.
So, step 1, write down your fears and what are they telling you. Step 2, why not?
Why not? And step 3, what is the worst that could happen? And be realistic. And if you're unsure, once again, Uncle Google knows everything and there's nothing wrong on the internet. So the first site you find, go into, it must be correct. Actually, I don't believe that. You do some research and don't believe in one site, go find trusted sources, do some research. If you really don't know what the risk is. And sometimes like if you go all out sharing and like you're trying to self-publish a book, that can cost you money to create a quality product, because you're taking on the risk of creating it. Where if you get published, publishers taking on that risk, you'll get a little bit less reward because you get a smaller cut of the proceeds, but they take on all the cost of the editing, which can be expensive if you want a decent editing job on a novel, that's, 800 pages, it's going to take a bit.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but I find that when almost every book I've ever read you'll find some sort of error in it. And it takes me right out of things. When I can, the grammar's wrong. Or, this sentence is wacky,
And
that's just me. That's the
sometimes the grammar is correct and it's still wacky and it still throws you off.
That's the type of reader that I am.
Yeah. And every reader will find those parts.
I want to add a step 4, do it anyway. So, what's the worst that could happen?
Here's
Step
the
3,
reason why I don't say do it anyway.
Do it anyway.
Because some of the fears in your head are honest. Going into that burning house, unless you have a really good reason.
All right, but this process is not about the burning house scenario. This process is about the creation scenario.
So do it anyway to write more fantasy stuff, so movies and videos can be made, and Mike and I can just sit back and watch them and do nothing else.
Yeah,
because we're kind of lazy.
Yeah, that'd be great. Well, you are.
Yeah.
I want to go back to the analogy of crashing down a hill on the first part of your project, because there was something I wrote up here that I wanted to add.
Yeah.
It says no idea or project is complete. Even once it's done, you don't have to like it. Just finish it, even if it doesn't feel done. So sometimes you'll create maybe a story, a novel, whatever. You never feel like it's complete because it might be so large of a project that every time you run through an editing process or every time you get to a certain point in it, you realize more revision and more revision and more revision, or it's evolving just based on time.
Yeah.
Like as the longer a project takes for you to complete, you have to understand that you as a person and a creator, you're changing too.
Yeah.
So like, for instance, I worked on this project with a friend of mine a long time ago, and I tried to return to that project years later, and I couldn't. I wrote a little kind of cap for it, but I could not write the same way that I wrote when I started and did the bulk of that project, because I'm just not the same man I was when I wrote it.
The thing I like about NaNoWriMo is it forces the first draft out quickly.
Right. Which is good. But to complete this thought, you basically have to choose and declare completion, even if it never feels complete.
Oh, yeah.
Because you can be revising forever. You have to accept that it may not ever feel like the exact story you intend, even if you keep changing and changing it to fit what you think is the perfect story in your mind. You have to decide that it's done. So like getting back to the crashing down the hill, you may never get to the bottom of the hill if you're constantly doing that.
But see, the irony is you've got past the fear to ride it, and now you've got into the fear of stopping.
And into the fear of saying, is this it?
Yeah.
Like
most of the people I know, and this might be a World Builder's Anvil first. I'm going to actually back up what Mike just said. I'm going to agree with Michael here live and recorded.
Come on, you've agreed with me before. I know. I thought you were about to admit something.
I love to be overdramatic.
I thought you were about to admit something about writing your own novel, and then you're like, I agree with Michael. What?
There are a lot of guys who I follow who teach sort of how to be an author, not from the writing end of things, but from the actual like creation.
The management.
Yeah, the management, more of the marketing side and stuff. Tim Grahl is a good one. Chandler, Tim Grahl. And there will be a link to him in the show notes, along with Chandler Bolt. He's at the self-publishing school, I believe, is his thing. And the two things they say, and then other people like Jeff Goins, who just writes, New York Times bestsellers.
That's all he does.
The one of the things that he says is, or all of them say is, before you start, come up with your draft sequence, and usually, I think the most common one is the 5 draft sequence, where there are 5 planned revisions.
And that's it.
The first draft, and then when you get to that 5th draft and are done, that last 5th one was the actual final polishing thing. And like Mike said, any book that you find, especially in its first edition, is going to have errors. The one great thing about digital books, if there isn't a written side, but even with the written side now, if it's an on-demand printed book, someone actually finds something that makes it through your 5-step editing. Guess what you can do?
Yeah, you can change it.
You can make a new edition much less expensive than a publishing house can do.
Yeah.
So, but for publishing houses, it takes revision. It'll take 5 or 6 editions maybe, and maybe there's still more. There's always a better way to do something. There's nothing that's ever been accused of being perfect outside of. No, never mind.
Well,
Jeff
was about to say himself, but we all know the only reason Jeff isn't perfect is because of his lack of humility. But he is working on it. Ish.
Okay. So now,
actually, that's probably an unfair statement. I know we're making a joke about it, but I think you nail humility.
I nailed it.
We're referring to a joke that we covered before the mics turned on, and Jeff had me laughing about it. So, humility, nailed it.
The world building task of the day.
I'm trying not to fuck you up.
I know. I got it covered.
You're doing it yourself.
Okay. The world builder's task of the day. Have an orc kill your real world task. That's it.
What's the real world task?
I guess that's kind of important.
It's kind of important. Yeah. If we're going to assign a team of orcs to kill your real world task, we need to know what the real world task is.
Follow our 3/4/5 steps.
It's 3 steps.
Our 3 steps. Write down those fears, the 3 steps, and have your orc kill them.
Have your orcs kill your fears.
Mm-hmm. And the neat thing to do it is when you're having your story, throw in there a random orc killing a piece of paper, and you don't ever explain it. Just
never
let it be there.
Could be steampunk, whatever.
Yeah.
Just there's an orc stabbing a book in the background.
It could be a hardcore future science fiction novel, all strict, perfect science, and have this one scene where there's this orc that's not even a race because they can't possibly exist, killing a piece of paper. And it dies.
The paper or the orc?
But yes.
Both. Okay.
Yeah.
Tease me, Jeff.
Next time we'll be talking about relations. And as always, make sure to go to gardul.com. That's GARDUL.com for the show notes. It'll be under podcasting, Worldbuilder's Anvil. That's a great place to get all of the information from the episode that you've just listened to and to see all the resources that we've talked about in this episode. Thanks for joining us this episode of the Worldbuilder's Anvil. Please be sure to rate and review us in iTunes, and please help get the word out to your friends about our show. And join me, Jeffrey W. Ingram at Gardul.com, to see the progress of my world and learn why I made the choices I did. And please contact me and let me know the topics you would love to hear in the future. Now strike while the myth rolls high.